Hello! So today we're going to be talking about trauma bonding, and this is my fourth video in my series on relationships and dating. So definitely check out the entire series and see what resonates with you. So we are going to get into trauma bonding when it comes to why it can be potentially a red flag, when it comes to trauma bonding in the beginning of getting to know anybody, whether that's a friendship, a relationship, a dating experience. And also we are going to be talking about trauma bonding when it comes to long-term relationships and also friendships. Little hint, you can trauma bond with your parents too. I want to start by explaining all of the things that can potentially go wrong with trauma bonding by explaining what is not trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is not somebody sharing their trauma with you in a way that feels good and you validating them in a way that feels good, as long as there is no responsibility that you take on their shoulders and you do not change what you are willing to accept from that person, and there is no agreement based on what you need to now do for them because of that. Now, this doesn't mean they can't have boundaries based off of their trauma or expectation or needs based off of their trauma, but we are talking about excusing them for horrible behavior, being guilted into doing something for them that doesn't feel good for you. We're talking about codependency. Let's start with trauma bonding when it comes to how it can potentially be a red flag in dating experiences. What's the difference between just like talking about your trauma in like a situation that would feel good and be healthy, and how trauma bonding can occur? Because I do want to mention that speaking about trauma, sharing trauma, connecting based off of your trauma, and receiving love, validation, and closeness with someone and bonding over it is not a bad or a toxic thing in and of itself. I'm using the term trauma bonding to specifically denote when this happens in an unhealthy and toxic way for both parties or one party. When you first start dating someone, it can be a huge red flag if they are asking you questions about your trauma right away. Like, not necessarily, but especially if you make a boundary around it and they keep pushing you and they really want to know. It can be a huge red flag. Also, somebody that you just like start dating and they're going to like upload all of their trauma onto you. It doesn't mean that they can't share certain specific things that are important information, but it's also how they share it. Like, for example, I have this boundary because of this general situation that I've been with versus this is the general situation I've been with and this is why I have this boundary. If you are sharing trauma in the very beginning of dating somebody or even being a friend with somebody, it's very dangerous because of this. We share the most vulnerable parts of our trauma with someone. How they respond is kind of like giving them a master key to deeper parts of ourselves, deeper insecurities within ourselves, deeper automated habits, deeper inability to stand for yourself, to have boundaries, to see issues when they arise. When anybody responds to the fact that they know something about us that is personal and vulnerable and real about us, it gives them more access to this feeling of connection with us, but it gives them kind of like, you know, depending on how extreme it is, it's like more and more attachment, a deeper and deeper key, a deeper and deeper access to our insides. And people have to earn that kind of trust because they could most definitely use it in ways that are extremely harmful to you. So, for instance, if you share your trauma with someone and they validate you and they become a healing experience around your trauma because of how they respond to you, the amount that you have just attached yourself to that person, opened yourself up to that person, and bonded like glue is ridiculous. And it doesn't mean that we can't do this with human beings, especially when you need to take it slow to find out who someone is when you're entering into sexual relationships or romantic relationships, or even how is this friend gonna treat me if I become glued to them, or if I become that attached to them, or if I become that open and vulnerable with them. And people can earn small amounts of your trust and treat you the right way in the beginning. And if you jump the gun and give them way more than they have earned, then you are setting yourself up to be taken advantage of by them, to lose a sense of your own personal timing around things and lose a sense of your own personal individuality, boundaries, standards. One example would be if you shared your trauma with someone, then they actually triggered you by how they responded. Now you're dealing with this person and how you operate in that situation from a triggered place. And that is a big recipe for disaster. And that is a big recipe for self-abandonment, but also them misusing you as well. There are very rare specific situations where sharing your trauma with someone in the first couple of dates or when you just meet them can be actually appropriate and not set you up for disaster, because they would have had to seriously have earned your trust first, and they would have had to have shared so many different kinds of experiences with you other than trauma before that, which can happen in the first couple of dates or on the first date. They would have had to share joy with you. They would have had to share laughter with you, positive experiences. They would have had to create a foundation with you in a way that is showing you that when they're asking about your trauma or they're telling you about their trauma, it's because they genuinely want to go further in the bonding experience, because things have already progressed so quickly naturally by how much you guys clicked and proved to be compatible already. But I would say that for me, an avoidance of trauma bonding, I would highly suggest to not share any real traumatic events that you've been through, and be very vague if you do need to share something in a certain situation. Very generic, very vague. Don't give them a lot of information about it. They don't have the right to that. I would say at least know someone for a good 5-6 months. Dated people for a year and not given them real information on that, because they didn't earn it from me in the way I needed them to. And when I did start sharing, they kind of lost my trust on why I wasn't sharing in the first place. You have to tiptoe with people. You have to build trust up with people, and they have to prove themselves again and again. It's not like because you gave them this much and they reacted the right way, now you can be like, whew, and all the way to the end, like the finish line, I'll just share anything with you now. You have to keep inching with them, because you may share this one thing with them and they react right, and then the next thing you share, they don't. Even if they react the right way, maybe they are also secretly taking advantage or using it to manipulate you or bond with you in a way that's unhealthy or toxic to you. It puts you at a serious vulnerability when they know about these things, emotionally, on a nervous system level, on a level of safety, and it creates attachments and bonding. Allow them to be able to manipulate situations with you and take advantage of you and hurt you more profoundly than if you hadn't shared that information. Like, I can tell you that no matter what one person is capable of doing to you, if you give them access to what your worst fears are and what your worst bad experiences are, they can use that to be worse to you than they already would have been if you hadn't. Giving them access to potentially misuse the worst that you've been through in your life to harm you is really focused on your trauma when they first get to know you, or if somebody is not setting up a proper foundation to discovering that about you and earning that from you, it is a serious red flag. There should be so much more put into the foundation setup of asking someone these questions or even sharing these things with someone. We're going to talk about long-term relationships and trauma bonding, and then I'm going to feed in a little bit on how that loops into your parents and friends and things as well. With long-term relationships or longer relationships, the trauma bonding could have started in the beginning, but it's progressed. It may not have started in the beginning, maybe it even happened 6 months down the line. But trauma bonding in long-term relationships looks more like of a trauma that they have that you relate to and understand, and relate to enough that it solidifies your own trauma and it solidifies your own experience. You are bonded to them in this way that may leave you to make excuses for them, that may leave you to feel guilt for them and responsibility for them, and will lead you to attempt to save them or take care of them in a way that you want to be saved or take care of. It is possibly going to look like you being incapable of seeing your own right in those situations, your own sense of self in those situations beyond their trauma, because really what you're seeing when you don't take care of yourself and you put their trauma first and you make excuses for their trauma and guilt yourself because of their trauma and have this story about their trauma that changes how you respect your own individual right in that situation, it's really because you're seeing and connecting to their trauma as if it was your own, and you're responding to it in the way that you would wish that person would respond to your trauma. You feel a sense of validation, closeness, false sense of healing by being in contact with someone who you feel like can understand you for what you're going through and the level of issues that you also have. This is just an unhealthy dynamic, though a lot of people are in it, and that's because we need to see people's trauma and care about it and validate it and be in presence with it. But everybody is a human being that is an individual, and relationships shouldn't be based off of trauma. It should be an extra added bonding experience that brings you to a closer sense of connection, but there shouldn't be attachments or contracts based off of it, and it shouldn't have to impair your judgment, and it shouldn't be, most importantly, the only reason you're with that person is the bonding of the trauma, because that can be the case too, so that there's not really compatibility or bonding in other areas. It's mostly that trauma that attracts you. When it comes to our parents that have been through a lot of things, we do the same kind of things that we may do in a long-term relationship, where we guilt ourselves, we act like the parent trying to take care of them, we baby them, we make excuses for them and how they treat us, we make contracts with them based off of their trauma. And that's gonna happen with friendships too. Take a look in your own life how you have potentially trauma bonded with someone in a way that it doesn't feel good, and take action towards changing that. But also really be careful about who you share your trauma with and your vulnerability with, because you are such an amazing human being, and you deserve to only give the most deep, vulnerable keys of access to your heart, your nervous system, your core self, to the people who have earned it, to the people who are trustworthy with it, because you deserve love and nothing less.
Running with desire as he runs the race. Half light, the moon is always knowing.